good afternoon to everybody joining, and thank you for spending your lunch hour with the CTSC of Northern Ohio. We are going to go ahead and get right into it as others join along the way. We are sharing today our REDCap overview, so features and highlights with our research electronic data capture. Today, I'm pleased to have presenting for us, our Director of Research Database Informatics, Sherry Hemphill. And she's going to share with you all of her expertise and ways to gain access and rev up your research and answer any questions that you might have regarding REDCap. So Sherry, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Great, thanks, Laura. If folks have questions along the way, feel free to put them in chat. We can kind of answer them as we go. So feel free to do that. I think Laura is so kind to keep an eye on that for me. So okay. So I'm Sherry Hemphill, and I'm the administrator for REDCap at both UH and at CASE. And I help some of the other institutions that we have as well listed here, which are all partners in our CTSC grant. So welcome everyone. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna highlight the features in REDCap, right? So we're gonna touch on different things that the software can do just so that you're aware of it. We're not going to do a build ourselves today, but I'm going to introduce you to the different tools that you can use in the software to create something. And anyway, here's our list of what we're going to cover. So we're going to go through each of these items. All right, so REDCap itself, what is it? I've heard about it, right? What the heck is it? So it's software that we have here. It was actually written by Vanderbilt University, and it's installed at lots of different institutions across the world, actually. It's web-based, and there's no cost to you to use it. You just need to get access to it, get an account, log in, and you can start building different data entry forms, surveys, things like that. Okay. And let me just show you here. So there's a main site for REDCap that Vanderbilt has that you might want to take a look at some point. It's just projectredcap.org. And you can see, this is updated. So there's a lot of places that use it. It's kind of amazing. Not to reminisce, but for CASE, we were institution number 20. So we were at the beginning kind of it. So it's amazing to me how much this has grown over time. It's incredible, really. And you can see it's all over the world at this point. They actually have, I'm not going to touch on this feature, but there's a multi-language module in the software. And it accommodates many languages really because it has spread so much to other countries. So okay. You could use it for all kinds of things, really, but it was developed really for research data. So a lot of the features in it and tools lend themselves to collecting research data, storing it, pulling out reports, pulling out data, and exporting for analysis for research. But if it helps you for any of these other purposes, any purpose at all, really, we don't restrict it to access. So you can use it for whatever you think it'll work for. So a lot of people do use it for quality improvement and tracking, operational support, things like that. And surveys we're going to talk about quite a bit today, so we'll hold off on that. So since I manage CASE and UH, I do have the links for those two specific instances of REDCap, but REDCap is at all of our institutions locally. So different institutions will probably have a different process for requesting their access, but these are the ones that I'm most familiar with. Right. So there's a new project request form that you would complete, and it's really the same for both UH and CASE, just on different sites. And once you request that, you get an empty project. We'll talk about that a little bit, and you'll get a login if you don't already have one, and you'll get access to the software. All right, this is just a screenshot of the case REDCap login screen. You can get to it from any location. You don't have to be on the case network. Same thing with the UH one. You don't have to be on the UH network to access it. And that's true of all the local instances that I'm aware of, that you can get to them from any location. All right. A lot of the items that we're going to cover are links that you'll find on the left side once you're logged in and in your project. The left side of the screen, which is called the navigation bar menu, and there's a close up of those links in the middle here. So almost everything that you'll want to find, you'll look over on the left for, right? And I'll highlight different features and where the links are for each of those features. Some of the things that I'm seeing here, I have everything turned on for me right now. So in user rights, which we'll talk about, you may have only a few things enabled for you. Just the things that you need really to do your work in the project will be turned on. And sometimes you have everything turned on if you're the owner of the project. So depending on what you have enabled, right, in user rights, what you have turned on or off for your login, different links will appear for you on the left side of the screen. So some people might only see a couple things under applications, while others will see a longer list. So if there's ever something that's not showing up for you here, it's probably because in user rights you weren't given access to it yet. So you could request that. Okay. So REDCap uses the term instrument to mean either data entry forms or surveys, right? Web-based surveys. And I'm just going to briefly talk about the difference between the two of those. When you get your project, right, this empty shell of a thing that you're going to create, um, it it's already set up for data entry. So that's what it's assuming you're doing. So that's already turned on for you. And data entry really means that you have a login, you have access to REDCap, you log into the system, you go into your project, and you can start entering data, right? Just typing in directly on the forms that you've created or someone else has created for you, right? So you have to have a login to get to data entry. Usually that's used by staff, right? Research teams, colleagues that you're working with directly. They're entering their own data. And and like I said, when you get the project, that's already what it is. It's data entry. The other very common use of REDCap is for surveys. So there are a couple of things that you need to turn on in your project to enable surveys. But the main difference is, when would you use a survey versus a data entry form? A survey comes from a link, right? You don't need to have a login. You might have a login, but you don't need to have a login to click a link to open up a survey that was created in REDCap. And then you can fill out the survey, right? It's just an empty form to fill out online. You fill it out, you submit it, all that data goes back into the REDCap project. Okay. And because there's no login, usually this is used for research studies. You'll send out survey links to participants in a study so that they can complete different, a battery of surveys, or maybe it's just one survey for you. It doesn't have to be participants either. Maybe it's people in your department. Maybe you're sending out a survey just to the department. Okay. And again, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to hop in. So data entry forms look like this. They can look actually a lot of ways because you build sort of what you want. So any two REDCap projects really probably look very different from each other, but this is the view for a data entry view, meaning you're logged in, you're trying to start a new record. Over on the left, this navigation bar area again, this is the data collection portion. There's a red add edit records link. So typically you'll click that and you'll be taken to either a choice of forms or a specific form if you just have one. And then you just start entering your data. And what's on the screen is something that someone, possibly you or someone else on your team, has actually created. So they've created a field for each of these things that you're seeing here, right? So that you can enter data into it and have your project collect that data and store that data. Surveys, on the other hand, look different, right? Again, there's no logon, there's no something to click to start a new record. You just get a link. There's different ways to get links that we'll talk about, but you just get a link and you fill in the form, right? So someone has to provide the link to you in some way. So if it's your project, you need to decide which method you're going to use for sending out links to people or posting them, if that's the case. Okay. So creating things in REDCap, right? There's really, these are the three main ways to build your projects, meaning build the survey or the data entry forms is what I'm talking about. And the main way is the online designer, the first thing listed here. I'll show you a little bit more detail about each of these in a moment, but the designer to me is the best way to do it. I would highly recommend using the designer. Maybe you only need to use the designer ever. Okay. The data dictionary method, I'll show you also in a little bit. It's more detailed. You really kind of have to know what you're typing in. You use an Excel spreadsheet instead of inside REDCap to create things. So it's more for advanced users, but honestly, you may never need to use it. And then there's the shared library of instruments, and you can use that together with either of the other um, build options. The shared library is really nice, and I'll show you a little bit about that too. Okay, so the online designer, also just called designer, actually in the menu on the left, it'll just say designer now. It's certain places in the software it says online designer, and some places it just says designer. Same exact thing. So it's a nice user-friendly, it's point and click interface that you can click on buttons for creating new instruments. You can click on buttons to add new fields or questions, right, to your instruments. And you don't have to know anything about databases. Actually, you really don't have to know anything about databases for any of the options, any of the build options. It assumes that you are new to this, you don't have any other background, so you just sort of build things the way REDCap will show you. Right. So key features here, right? As I mentioned, you can create the surveys and the data entry forms together. There's different things that have to be enabled to do surveys in your project. And there's all kinds of different field types, data types, text boxes, drop downs, visual analog scales, uh, all kinds of things, right? There's something called branching logic and field validation. We'll touch on that later. And you can look at the look of the data entry form in real time. So as you're building it, you can see exactly how it's going to look later, immediately, right? And of course, why would you use this? You would use it because it's really the easiest option. It's the easiest option. It's kind of easy because it doesn't let you make mistakes when you're doing it. So you don't have to really know anything. You just kind of select the options and it'll create everything for you behind the scenes. Here's what it looks like. So this is from the left navigation bar. You can see it just says designer. It's in a section called project home and design, just towards the top left. And so you click designer, you're going to be taken into this area, which will have a list of instruments. When you get a new project, there's only one instrument in it. It'll be called Form 1. So this one obviously already has a few instruments in it. This is not an empty brand new project. And you can go into the designer to start building from scratch when nothing really is in your project, or maybe you inherit a project from someone and you need to add a couple more choices to a drop down or add another question that you guys didn't used to collect. And you would actually come into the designer the same way, but you would go into the instruments that are there and you would edit them. When you're in a specific instrument, right, you're going to see these kinds of buttons, right? So in a specific instrument, there's actually the very first instrument on the very first field on the first instrument is always going to be called record ID. You can change that name if you want to, but you can't move that field. It's always going to be first. And that's a unique identifier for each record that you're entering. So if somebody's taking a survey and they're the first person that takes your survey, they'll be number one. and number 2, and so on. All right, so that's sort of there. After that, you can create whatever you want. So in this example, these are already in here, but an age field. It's a text box field type, and there's also ethnicity, and this is a multiple choice, single answer radio buttons field. And so what I'm focusing on here, though, are what these icons mean, right? So for every single field that you've created, you can notice the record ID does not have these because it's very limited what you can do with that one. But everything else that you've made, you can edit. So these are what the icons mean, right? So to edit the field, you'll actually go into it and you can define it. You can change the label. You can change that it's a text box field to a drop-down field. You can do any of those things. You can also add in validations that we'll talk about later. There's also an icon for what's called branching logic, and that's where perhaps you ask a question, not a good example in here, but if you ask a question and they answer it yes, maybe there's other questions you want to ask them. But if they answer it no, you don't want to ask the other questions. That's what branching logic is. So that's all controlled in here. If you have some fields that are very similar to each other, it's helpful. It's a little quicker if you use the copy field button. So you can copy it a bunch of times, edit it, and change the label, change the name, and so on. Move field, you can relocate where these fields are on this instrument. You could even move them to a different instrument or form, and you can delete the field entirely. Right? And these are the 3 buttons that you're going to see. They're going to keep appearing over and over again in different positions. They're the same buttons, right? And you already know that you can move the field. So it's not super important, but usually people kind of add them in order. So often you're using the last row of buttons to add in new fields each time. And add field is for a single field, like I'm showing you here. There's also a button for what's called a matrix of fields. And that is a grid of fields together that all have the same set of answers. So you might have like strongly agree to strongly disagree in columns as the answers, and then a whole bunch of questions where those are the choices for them. That's what a matrix is. And then there's something called the field bank that honestly I've not found super useful, but it's a place you can click there. You can search on, say you search on race, and it'll give you suggestions for what you can use for that field type. Okay. So the data dictionary, so that was the online designer, right? That we were looking at, point and click buttons, easy to edit, right? So this is the data dictionary. So behind every project, there is a data dictionary, whether you use it or not. And it actually contains the setup for your project. So it contains a list of fields and which instruments those fields belong to in a spreadsheet. Right? And all the details about each field is in that spreadsheet. So you'll have a label, you'll have the shortened version of the name of that field, you'll have maybe a section header, you'll have that it's a text box field or a radio button field. You'll have the choices for that field if it's a multiple choice field. You'll have all of that detail, but it'll be in Excel. It's technically a CSV file, but you can save that. You can edit it in Excel and you can save it as CSV from Excel. All right. And the biggest thing about this is I'd say only advanced users should use this. Again, you may never need to use this at all. There's really nothing I can think of that you can do in the data dictionary that you can't do in the designer. Actually, there's some things you can do in the designer that the dictionary doesn't have in it, such as survey settings, for example. The other thing, I think the dictionary could be useful if you have a lot of fields and there are a lot of repetition between them. You can have the fields in your spreadsheet. You can copy a whole block of those rows really easily into the spreadsheet and then edit them. And then you would upload this data dictionary and it would replace what's in your project, completely replaces it. So anything you had there is going to be overwritten with whatever's in the data dictionary. So that's important to know because people don't always realize that piece. Okay, so anyway, it's there. One thing that is really nice about it is it's a file, right? So you could create your project. Maybe you've made a lot of nice instruments and you want to give it to someone else so that they can make a similar project. You could just download the dictionary, right? The Excel file and email it to them. And then they can take that file and upload it into their project and it'll recreate most of the project. Right. This is what it looks like. So dictionary, there's a link on the left, same area. Here's designer dictionary. And when you go there, you're going to get the step 1, step 2. So they try to lead you through the steps for it. The first thing is to grab the current data dictionary. So there's already one there. Even when you get a new project that's pretty much empty, there'll be one. Actually, it'll be like this. It'll be record ID form 1. That's all you're going to get in your new project. So if you were to download it, that's really all you're going to see in there. You can edit this, you can add rows in here, you can add fields, and then you can save it, and then you can upload it again. And remember, it's going to overwrite what was there. It's not going to add to it, but it'll overwrite it. Okay. You can see there's a lot more columns in here than I had room to show on the screen, but here's the field name, right? Form name, which is the instrument, section header if you have one, the field type, label, and so on. Okay. The next option, which you can use with any of the other options, right, is called the REDCap Shared Library. And it's very helpful. It has a lot in it. It doesn't have everything in it, but I would say if you are trying to create something that's a pretty well-known survey, I would look in the library, see if it's already there for you. So this is already made instruments. Somebody created these, right? The fields are created, the choices are created. There might even be scoring involved in it if it's a validated instrument for evaluation. And you just go to the library, you search on what you're looking for, search a few ways. It's a little hard to find things, honestly, sometimes. So keep it simple. Don't use a lot of words when you're searching. Pick a kind of a unique word and search on that if you can, and then go through what it returns and see if anything that you need is there. Only things that people have requested really are in the library. So it's gotten to be quite large, but it definitely doesn't have everything in it. There's gaps in it. Things that you think, why isn't that in there? Everyone uses that, but some things aren't there. One nice thing that is there, some people use the promise instruments, and those are special. Those can be they can be static instruments where you're asking questions for surveys for different areas, but they can also be adaptive, meaning as one question is answered by the participant, it'll take that into consideration and then it'll give them possibly a different next question. So that's all in there in the library if you're interested in the promise area. Okay, so what's nice about this is, everything else you have to build it, right? Unless somebody gave you something, right? You have to build it from scratch. There's not a lot in there. So this is great because you can download it. It's already there. You can edit it. Usually you can edit it. Some of the promise ones you can't because of the nature of them. But you can edit it. You can add fields. You can delete fields and so on. This is what the library looks like. So in your this is actually in the designer area is where you'll see it. But there's an option, a button that says import a new instrument from the official REDCap instrument library. Okay. When you click that, it's going to take you here. It's actually going to take you away from our local instance of REDCap, and it'll put you on Vanderbilt's instance because they're the developers of the software and they're the ones that host all these library instruments. So it'll take you over to theirs temporarily. You will search on whatever you want to search on, and then it'll bring back however many results. Like I just searched on sleep. It actually brought back 84 matches for just the word sleep. And then you can look through them. You can see a preview of the instrument if you want. There's a PDF preview. There's a web page preview. You can see what it is before you actually download it and see if it's what you wanted or if it's not at all what you were expecting. And so if it's something you want, then you'll just actually see how this says import into my REDCap project. You'll click that. This will come up. where you're importing it into your project. You can change the name if you want to as it's going to appear in your project, and then you'll just add it in. So once you've done that, it's going to show up in your list of instruments, just as though you made it yourself. So somebody else created it, somebody else tested it, somebody else uploaded it to the library for you. Okay, so that's a very nice feature. Even when you're learning, you might want to grab something from the library just to sort of look at and learn from. It's a nice way to see examples of things, even if they're not directly the things that you're looking for. Okay, so surveys. We'll talk about surveys a little bit more. You can obviously you can create surveys in REDCap. We've talked about that. You can create them with any of those build options. So it doesn't matter if you're doing data entry or surveys, you actually create the questions the same way, the fields the same way. Doesn't matter. So you'll use Online Designer, for example, and then there's some extra things that will need to be turned on in the software so that REDCap knows that that's supposed to be a survey. There's gonna be some extra settings that are there that you'll need to turn on and enable. So, but the surveys, you can send them out in a variety of ways. We'll talk a little bit about that here. So you can send out email invitations. Um, there's different kinds of links in REDCap. There's something called a public survey link. That's a single link. Everyone would use that same link. And sometimes that's put on a flyer. Maybe there's a QR code that goes to that link that people can just scan with their phones and fill out a survey, right? And the there's other kinds of links that we'll talk about shortly that are different than the public survey link. So the main things you can do in REDCap are you can actually automate the invitations going out. Maybe you need to send the survey every month to people or every day. Maybe it's a daily symptom survey. You can send reminders. REDCap will do this on its own for you once you've set it up. You can have both kinds of identification levels. So you could have a survey that's completely anonymous, where you don't know who did it, right? Unless you're asking who they are on the survey. And you can also have surveys that are tracked, meaning you know who did it, you know whose email it was, you know exactly which survey is theirs, and then you can do what's in between both of those, where you know the emails of the people that did it, but you still don't know which exact survey is theirs. Okay, so there's all kinds of levels of that depending on what you need. Mobile friendly means you can open the survey really on any device, and REDCap will detect the device screen size and it'll accommodate for that. Right. So like on a phone, phones are really common to take surveys on anymore. Or it could be, and maybe they're opening it from a link that they were sent on the phone, or maybe they're scanning a QR code. It works great on computers, on laptops, right? Desktops. It works great on tablets. Tablets are also used often when collecting data, maybe in the field or in emergency rooms. That's been pretty common, or in the waiting area outside a doctor's office. If they want to ask them to fill out a survey, you could use a tablet nicely for that. Okay, so the anonymity I mentioned a little bit. So these are the levels, right? So you can have completely anonymous that I mentioned, right? So you don't know who they are, right? None of your questions could be identifiable. And typically you'd use the public survey link for this. So again, it's one link. Everyone uses that link. You wouldn't really send out the invitations from REDCap, but you could email them out yourself. You just have that one link in your email and send it to a bunch of people, or a listserv you could send it to. Sometimes people do put those on flyers that they're going to post somewhere, or maybe it's going to be a slide in a presentation and you want them to take the survey after the presentation. Things like that you can do. Okay. Um, the second option here is anonymous, but with linking. So this is a really common request where you might be doing some kind of an intervention and you have a pretest, pre-survey, right? You do the intervention and then you've got a post survey after it to evaluate how things have changed. So you can still keep those connected so that you know it was the same person doing the pre and the post, but still not know who they are. So there's a way that REDCap can handle that. It's called the participant list option in the software, and you would populate it with emails for who you're going to send it to, and it will know um, that that person did it. It'll assign them an ID, but you won't know what their ID is. So like number 3 is the same person pre and post. Number, 11, it's their pre and their post that are connected, but you don't know whose it is. Okay, so this is very often used. And then sometimes you actually do need it to be identifiable, just the nature of what you're collecting. That's also possible. Same thing with the participant list you would use, but there's an extra layer that you would enable so that it is identifiable. And there's all these warnings, just so you know, you won't accidentally do that because it'll say, are you sure you want to do this? Because it's going to make it all identifiable. So it warns you that if you click this button and you enable this next level, that you can't go back, right? Because you've identified things. Okay. Right. So it's all or both of these, all of these levels are in this area again on the left, called Survey Distribution Tools. And you can see when you click on that, there's actually 3 tabs here. We're talking about public survey link, participant list, and then this third thing is actually used by, or really used by the participant list mostly. This is a log of all the invitations that were sent or that are scheduled to be sent in the future. You can see them all there so that you can double check yourself to make sure things are going to go out when you want them to. Right? That's very useful. But back to the public survey link, right? The anonymous version, you'll automatically, as soon as the project is created and surveys are enabled, you're going to get, and I've masked this a little bit, right, so that you don't have a specific link here, but you're going to get an exact link for your project. It only ever goes to the very first instrument in your project, very first survey. So sometimes people have 3 surveys in their project and they think, oh, I want to use public links for all of them. You won't get public links for all of them. You're only going to get it for the first one. So sometimes you have to have 3 projects so that you can get 3 different public links. Just depends on what you're trying to do, what makes sense. And I can help you with figuring that out. It's not always clear right away. Okay, again, no tracking involved at all with this. Right. And then this next option is the one that I mentioned about doing like a pre and a post version. So same area, right? Survey distribution tools. This one's the second tab, the participant list tab. This is where you would list the emails of who you're going to send it to. And you have to actually send out from REDCap for this, because what it does is, see how there's a link column here? It's actually creating, in that moment that you're adding the email, it's creating a unique link for every single person listed here, every single email listed here. So you would send out the invitations, the emails from here. You would use compose survey invitations, and REDCap will automatically insert the correct unique link for that person for that survey in that invitation that goes out. So it handles all of that for you, right? The other thing about these that's different from the public links are they are single use links. So once the person takes it, they can't take it a second time. It's already used up and the software knows that. And the public links can be used any unlimited numbers of times, right? So the same person could potentially fill that in multiple times and you wouldn't have a way of knowing that, right? And here's where you can see connections if you're going to use the participant list, where you could have a pre-survey and a post-survey, and record ID 1 is the same person, but you don't know who they are, right? They are connected together for analysis for later. All right, so there's a few details I want to talk about for data quality. This is part of the build process, these that are on the screen here. And then there's another data quality module, data quality tool that you can use sort of after the build, after the fact, after you have data. So here, this is part of you setting up your fields. There's something called real-time validation. So if you have a text box field, there are a list of different validation formats. And all that means is it's going to restrict what can be typed in the box. So it could be, maybe it could only be a number, maybe it could only be an integer, maybe it could only be a date, and so on. Right. So you can limit things. And so it'll help keep the data cleaner if you use these everywhere that you can, because you won't get these stray entries in there that, like, you asked for a date and they didn't type a date in. So, which would affect your data analysis later on. It makes it harder, right? There'll be more cleanup then. Branching logic, we briefly touched on, and that again is, you can set this up when you're building your project. You're going to do field by field. You'll say, okay, when this question above is answered, I want the bottom question to only appear when this answer is yes, right? Or when it's no. So they give an example there, right? So do you smoke? If you say yes, then maybe you also want to ask how many packs per day. Okay. This is the module that I mentioned. So this is a tool that REDCap has in it. You wouldn't use it ahead of time when you're building it, but you would use it later after you have data collected to check the data, to look for outliers, to look for errors, really, missing data that should have been filled in, and so on. Right. So there's a whole list of things here, and it just helps you, recognize issues in the data, helps you keep things clean, and so on. Right. So here's again, left navigation bar, right? You'll see data quality. And remember, not everyone will see all of these items. So if data quality isn't turned on for you, there's not going to even be a link for it there. If you need it, just ask the owner of the project, whoever created the project, to turn that on for you, and then you'll see this. So here's a list of the rules that you can run. These are built-in rules. You can also create your own rules by putting in syntax that's down below the screenshot. But so this one I ran uh, blank value. So it's going to check for any fields that aren't filled in, right? And so it checked everything in this project, and it brought back 21 fields that don't have something in it. You can click view, you can export this list to work off of it in a file. But if you click view, you're going to get this over on the right, where it's going to list what the record is. So this is all from the same record, what the record ID is, and which fields are missing data. So this might just be an empty record altogether. Maybe it was saved and nothing was entered for it, but you could check that. Okay. All right. User rights module. So user rights, you can control what each user can and can't do in your project very specifically. All right. So, and I'll show you the screen here. This is really critical because, you know, you want to only give rights to people for what they need, right? You don't want to give them extra rights because people can get into trouble trouble that way, right? Doing things that they don't really understand or don't know about. Like, for example, you don't want someone doing the project design and setup if they really should just be doing data entry, right? So you want to sort of give permissions on an as needed basis, and also per instrument that you've created. This list will change based on what you've created in your project, but you can see there's different levels of what you can see, what that user can see, and what they can export or nothing, right? So you can control all of this from here. And again, you need to have user rights access yourself to be able to even get in here. So this is a high level right. The project owner, the person requesting the project, and or the PI will definitely have access to user rights to control that for everyone on their project. Okay, exporting. You can export data in REDCap, certainly, and there's lots of different formats. We'll look at those. They're listed here. And there are options to export data for with identifiers if you have those in your data. And there's also a way to export de-identified data. They give you some different choices to strip off the identifiers, which is great. Right. Usually, often people will export data out of REDCap to do their analysis. So typically, typically they're going to export it to a statistical software or maybe Excel, depending on the complexity of what you're trying to analyze. So REDCap isn't a stat software. It has a couple little features in here that I'll show you, but it doesn't really do analysis for you. So typically you're going to need to export it out, do your analysis outside of REDCap. As far as the de-identification goes, there's a specific little thing that they call tagging. So for every field that you create, there's going to be this identifier, yes or no. It'll default to no. But if you've created a field and it's their name or it's their email or, you know, data visit, right? Any of those things are considered PHI, right? So you would want to mark them. It's up to you to mark these correctly. It's important to mark them correctly as a yes. And then later on, when you export the data, you can say, take off all those fields that are tagged as identifiers. That's one of the levels of de-identification it does on export. Okay. Exporting again and de-identifying again, right? So there's an area called data exports, reports, and stats, and we're going to go through a couple of these sections here, but the everything's sort of together there. They're sort of merged together. But exporting data, you'll come into that area, you'll pick what you want to export. So for example, this is all data, export data. You would click that button and you would see a window kind of like this, right? Where you get the different formats to choose from. You have to pick one of them. If you want more than one, you could do it twice and select a different one each time. In the middle here, these are the de-identification options they give you. So the first one is what I was just mentioning. This says remove all tagged identifier fields. So anything that you've marked as identifier yes won't come out in the export if you check that off. Okay. You could also have users that are only allowed to export data that's de-identified. If that's the case in user rights, if you've set that up, some of these things will be pre-checked for them here. They won't be able to uncheck them so that they're restricted on what they can export out. Okay, in formats you can see, right? Excel has two, raw and labels. Raw are the coded values. So like ones and zeros, if it's a yes, no question, labels would actually have the text, yes or no in the data that comes out. SPSS, SAS, R, Stata, those are all pretty widely used. Stata is less used, I'd say, but SPSS, SAS, and R are the most widely used packages. And you could really pull it into any stats package by pulling out one of the Excel formats. Okay. Reports go hand in hand with the exports. You can create a report is really just you selecting what fields you want. You might pick everything, but you can pick and choose to only a subset of the fields for the report. And then you can export or include all of the data in the report. Or you could say, you know what, I only want to include people that said yes to smoking, for example, or people that are greater than a certain age or greater than a certain BMI. Whatever you want to filter on, you can filter on. So then you get a subset of the data out that's matching the criteria that you specified. That's what a report is. You can look at it on the screen. You could export it out. You could look at some basic stats and charts for it. Okay, so here's what a view of a report might look like. So certain columns were selected. This is just seeing it on the screen. You can also print it. If it's small enough, you can print it. A lot of these reports might be too big to print, and then you can export it and you can look at stats and charts for it. So this is just a subset of data that matches whatever your filtering criteria is. All right, stats and charts. Look at an example here. I'm actually going to jump here. Stats and charts are graphs that you'll get, bar charts, scatter plots, for things that it can graph. And if it's a numeric field, it'll give you this basic descriptive stats for those. So percentiles, right, mean, and so on. And in the scatter plot, it's showing you the red dot is actually the median value, and all the blue dots are true data points. These are clickable, so you could say, "What's that? 102," and then click on that. It'll take you over to that record, and you can verify if is that actually right. Do I need to correct it? So you can see outliers very nicely in here. And then for anything that's multiple choice, you have the choice of bar charts. You can actually change this to pie charts. There's some other options in there. This also tells you how many are missing for that field and percentages that have chosen these different values. So this is pretty nice. This is kind of as far as REDCap goes though with statistics and analysis. You can make reports. filter it out, and then relook at the charts. It'll redo them for the subset of data that you filtered out. And you could have several of those to compare, but otherwise you would probably be exporting to a statistical package. Data import tool, this isn't super widely used, but sometimes you might have existing data that's already in Excel, or maybe it's data that's coming out of equipment and you can export it into Excel and then you want to import it into REDCap. You don't want to data enter it in again, right? Because that could introduce errors. So there's a nice tool they have. The data has to be in basically an Excel file, a CSV file, and it has to be in a specific format, but you could just import the data in. You do have to have the fields created ahead of time. So like each column that you want to import in, each type of data, each field has to exist in your project. So you would have to make those fields if they don't already exist, and then import into REDCap. Okay. Audit trails and logging. There's in every project, there's an area called logging. Let me just put the screen for that area called logging. And so from even the very beginning, from when the administrator creates your project, that'll be logged. It'll be in there and it'll say the date and time and who did it, right? And anytime does data entry, if you change fields, if you do some setup, if you enable surveys or longitudinal, all of that's in here, right? As you're entering data, if it's a new record, it'll say create record. If you're updating it, it'll say that. If you're deleting it, it'll say that. So all of that's in here. So sometimes you need to look up something that happened in the past and just figure out why is that this way right now. So you can actually look in here, trace it back. There's all kinds of filtering options so that you can limit it to different time points, or just use certain users, certain records, and so on. Okay, so this is very powerful, and just know that it's there for you. All right, the last couple of things I want to touch on are there are a couple apps that REDCap has. You don't need to use these apps typically. They're used for very specific purposes, but I want you to know more about them. So the first one is it's called the REDCap mobile app, right? And that would be for people that have access to REDCap. They're again, it's like staff. It's sort of like data entry, but doing it on a device through the mobile app. And we'll talk about more about the restrictions or what it's actually for. So MyCap is the other option. That's actually something that participants would use. You'd actually send them a QR code essentially to enroll in your study, and it's something they have to install on their devices. So the first one's really for staff. The second one is really for participants. Okay, so the mobile app is intended for offline data collection. So typically with REDCap, of course, it's a web-based application. You need access to the internet, right, to get to it. Well, sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes maybe you're collecting data in people's homes, and maybe it's rural. Maybe you don't have necessarily a connection there. Maybe the cell signal is weak, and so on. So this app will allow you to not have a connection at that moment that you're entering data. You could basically download all your forms into the app. Everything that you've created inside regular REDCap will be in the app, everything that you've enabled, and then you can do data entry on a tablet or on your phone. All of that data stays on that device. It's encrypted on that device, so it's safe. Say the device gets lost or stolen, it's encrypted. No one can see that data. And once you do have a connection later, all of that data will get synchronized back to REDCap itself. So it'll all wind up back there later, right? So at some point you have to have an internet connection. This was used, kind of the first use of it that I remember through CASE was with some of the global health studies. They've done several in Africa, and they would go into villages to collect data. Carrying hard copies of paper is really heavy and expensive around, lugging it around. They really wanted to try to do it electronically. So this was perfect for them. So they used the mobile app. They bought some inexpensive tablets in case they did get stolen. And this is what they did. So this worked out really well. Okay. The other one is MyCap. MyCap is, it's really in any of the projects. So say you get a project, right? You just request a project. In project setup, you'll see MyCap listed. So MyCap is you in your project sort of creating your own app for the participant to use, right? So it's very specific, right? A lot of studies, maybe that wouldn't be something you could do. Maybe not everyone's going to have a device. You have to count on people having a device that they can load this on, and they have to be somewhat tech savvy to be able to do that piece of it, right? So it's only for certain demographics, I would say. And it's really nice for collecting data for daily surveys or something that's really repetitive. So they can, every day, they can just open the survey, they'll get a reminder in the app, and they'll fill in whatever they need to fill in, right? It could also tap into some of the Apple Health features. Some of those are listed as well. Um, it too can work when there's no connection, because maybe they don't always have a connection, the participant, you don't have any control over that, right? But when they do have a connection later, all of that data will automatically sync back to the server, to the REDCap database. Okay. You can even send notifications, like it'll push out reminders to people, or you can send messages to all the people on your study. That's really nice.
Carrie, we have some questions in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So the first one is from Lori. She has several surveys linked in REDCap. The participant finishes one survey and it automatically goes to the next. The first survey is a screening tool. If the participant clicks no for any of the questions on the first, they should not be able to go on to the next. But she can't figure out how to stop them from going on. Right now, it's set for all participants to automatically go on to the next survey.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So in I don't have a screenshot of this setting, but it's in survey settings where you for every survey, right? Every survey has survey settings which control what it looks like and the behavior of that particular survey. So if you have a string of surveys, every single one of them will have their own survey settings. But in the place where you've enabled auto continue, right? So that once they're done with that one survey that they're going to go on to the next, there's an area that will accept logic. So I can help you with what to write there, but you can say, you'll have to figure out, because you'll have several fields related to it, right? But say they answer no to this question, well, they can't continue on, right? So in the logic, what you want to say is who can continue on. So you have to build your statement. It's just going to be sort of a little equation of this field equals this and this field equals this, something like that. But again, I can help you with that because that's a little bit more technical, but that will stop it. If it doesn't meet that criteria, it won't continue them on. And so they won't go through the whole next sequence of everything. You probably just have to do it for that first screening survey, it sounds like. Okay. And by the way, I'm happy to meet with people. I have all kinds of Zoom meetings, consultation meetings with people all the time. And feel free to reach out to me. I've got some contact info at the end here to schedule something. And then I can look at, you can share your screen. I can look at your project with you, and I can help you with things like that.
And
Okay.
the second one is about incentives. Are you able to offer an incentive to complete the survey? For example, raffling off 10 gift cards to those who complete it and maintain a not anonymity. I'm gonna mix that up with the responses through REDCap.
Say that 5 times fast, right? No, that's a hard word. So yes, you can. So the way that you would handle that is you'd have your you have your data that you're actually collecting in one project. You'd have a separate project that's going to be for the raffle entry, right? So, and I'm assuming you're not collecting anything identifiable in the other project, right? So, because that's the point. So, what you would do is at the end of the other project, maybe they get to the last survey, there's an option to redirect them to another link, another URL. You can put the public survey link from the second raffle project into that. So at the end, they're just going to be taken onto this different, separate, not connected at all project where they can, if they want to, right, enter their contact info if they want to be included in the raffle. So that's typically what's done.
Right.
Again, I can help with that. because there's a couple steps to that.
Yeah. And then at a high level, can you describe why a researcher might want to choose REDCap versus Qualtrics or another version, possibly that Case employs?
That's a hard question because it's sort of like there's lots of tools, right? There's always lots of ways to do things. And I actually personally have not used Qualtrics in depth. I've used it a little bit to know where all the differences are. But I'd say one main version is, um, at least at Case, right? The IRB is very pro REDCap. So if they know that you're storing your data in REDCap and using REDCap, they know it's secure, they're all happy about it, right? You want to make the IRB happy. So so that's the biggest reason. That's actually true at UH as well. Sometimes people might want to use another system. There's nothing wrong with the other systems, right? But the data for REDCap, we actually have it stored locally. So at Case, it's on our Case servers. Um, if you use now Qualtrics, I'm not sure where it's actually housed. If it's housed in the cloud, obviously it's particular to Case, but certain softwares they don't want like PHI to be stored in. So that would be a little bit of a question to the IRB whether if you really want to use Qualtrics, they might say, yep, that's fine for what you're collecting. But other things they want you to focus on REDCap. So as far as feature by feature, I don't know. I can't compare them for you. There's probably information actually online if you tried to do a comparison between REDCap and whichever system that you're thinking of. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, I guess the local storage of data is a big one. So like at Case, we have our REDCap servers are in what's called the secure research environment, the SRE, and that's really locked down. We know it's controlled, it's kept updated, all the security patches, everything. Everything's nice and secure, and we know where our data is. If you're storing it somewhere else, well, it's not really at Case, right? It could be elsewhere, and that might not be good.
Okay, that's all the questions in the chat. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and we're about at the end of what I have here. So there's a lot of features in REDCap, period. So there's not time to go through everything in one session like this. But some of the other things it can do are you can once you've created an instrument, whether it's a survey or a form, you can generate a PDF automatically of it. You can generate an empty PDF to use if you need to for hard copies, or you could generate a filled in PDF from what somebody filled in their survey. You can do, I talked about this a tiny bit, but automated survey invitations where you can schedule invitations to go out on certain dates and times, or maybe so many days from their baseline date, you could start sending surveys. You can do all kinds of things like that. Uh, Alerts and notifications are similar. Those don't necessarily have an invitation in them, but you could automate, those are typically emails uh, to go out. So say I know someone did this recently. They have like a depression inventory scale. And if you score a certain amount, maybe they have concerns about that. So like you can actually check in the alert if their score is greater than this amount, send an email to the project study coordinator or the nurse on the study to check into that further. Things like that you can do. There's randomization. I'm skipping a couple of these. There's randomization module in REDCap that you can use for randomizing subjects to participants to a group, right? And there's an e-consent framework that's a little bit involved, and CASE does recommend using that. UH does as well. And text messaging is another option. That's something that costs money, though. You have to have an account, a third-party account. Twilio is the main company that they use. There's a couple others in there as well, but Twilio is by far the one that people use, and it costs money per text. I think it's pretty low, but that's another option. Here. Right. I've just got how do you get help, right? So I would if you're completely new to REDCap, right, I would start with looking. I would not actually I would not go to the help and FAQ if you're completely new to REDCap. That's more for if you have a specific question and you're stuck on something, go there and you can search on what you're stuck on. Training videos are the thing for beginners though, by far. So I'd recommend people just watching these. Some of them might be on topics that you don't need, so just watch the ones that make sense for you. And I think you'll get a sense of what the software is. It won't be specific, but it'll hit each area and how to build different things and so on. Um, for every institution, pretty much I have these 4 here anyway, there's a REDCap support email, so I would heavily use that. So if you have questions, go ahead and email whichever institution you're from, email that support email to, you know, to get any further help. If you have questions or even if you want to meet, you can email that email and they'll contact me and set that up. Okay. And last slide here, Laura maybe can speak to this more than I can, but this is about our CTSC grant. There, you could become a member. There's all kinds of presentations and talks and all kinds of things that you get when you're a member. And there's a QR code there. Surprise, surprise, right? QR code that you can scan and you can sign up to become a member.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry. We appreciate your time. And this presentation will be recorded and shared afterwards. So if you have any additional questions, Sherry's email. And of course, if you have any other questions related to the CTSC in terms of funding, events, or our services and resources, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much and enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.